And now we have our secret speaker, In Search of the Future, Why You Should Leave What You Know to Discover Your Purpose by Vance Crowe.
Well, thanks, Marcio. It's an interesting concept that you brought up in the very beginning as the rocket was starting to take off. I don't know how many people realize this, but yesterday, Mars was as close to the Earth as it can possibly be. And there was a text string going on in my family of people saying, can you imagine that maybe by the next time Mars is this close, maybe we'll have people there? Maybe we'll have astronauts. And maybe if you think about it from the swine industry's perspective, maybe one day we'll be raising pigs on Mars. Who knows? The question really becomes, how do you go out and find the future or create it when you don't really know what it's going to look like? Right now, you're seeing me as an avatar looking at you in this kind of space suit surrounded by the Milky Way, and you have to wonder, will this be the future? Well, I can tell you that I really have no way of knowing what the future is, and I really don't think anybody else does either. But what you're doing here today, what Marcio, the people at SwineTalks are really focused on, is trying to figure out, how do you create the dynamics? How do you create the situation where you can be a participant and actually push the future forward? And I want to do this by running through a series of incredibly complicated ideas, but just to give you a taste of each one of them. Because I think that it's some combination of understanding these ideas that allows you to boldly go towards the future and actually helps you find your purpose when you stop looking for it. So we're going to talk about things like novelty search, daemons, the trough of disillusionment, and conclude with the idea of purpose. Novelty search. Novelty search is an interesting concept created by a man named Dr. Kenneth Stanley in a totally different field than swine. He actually studies artificial intelligence, and he made a rather shocking discovery at one point in his career. You see, for a long time, when artificial intelligence and roboticists were trying to make it so robots could walk, they tried to take exactly what they knew about the way humans walked or the way other bipeds walked, and they just tried to make it better. As you can see on the screen, the left-hand side is called Fitness Best. And you see that this little model just keeps falling over. That's when they took everything they knew about the way that human beings moved or other bipeds, and they tried to just keep making it better and better. And no matter how long they worked on it, for more than 20 years, they could never get it to go more than a few steps. But when they took a step back and they stopped trying to make the thing walk, and instead they started programming the computer to allow it to search for interesting things, to allow it to make whatever rules it needed to make, and allowed it to search out novelty, do something different than you've done before. Eventually, the robot created itself so that it could walk on its own. They didn't anticipate that. They didn't actually set out to make the robot walk. It's just that eventually, when the robot was told, find something new and keep running new patterns until you discover something new, and that's what you're going to be rewarded for, eventually it figured out where to have the proper break point, how to move, and the fact that it wanted to move. This is called a novelty search, and it propelled forward artificial intelligence on a level that nobody ever anticipated when they first started. When you go in and you read anything about this concept of the novelty search, you start to realize that this is not a new concept. In fact, if you go back and look at philosophers of old, whether it's Goethe or Nietzsche or Carl Jung more recently, you start to hear that all of them talk about this concept called the daemon. The daemon sounds like demon, but it's not quite that. It's something just a little bit different, and it's something that I'm sure every single one of you has inside of you. It's that voice that says, there's something interesting over there. There's something that I'm curious about. There's something that I don't really understand, but I feel drawn towards it. Now, if you start to listen to this daemon, it will take you to places where everyone else around you is going to say, nah, don't go there. That's not important. Or that's not really how we do things, right? But for the biggest breakthroughs, they aren't done by knowing exactly where you're going, or even if you have an objective, trying to get there as fast as you can. Instead, it's by allowing your curiosity, the thing that pulls your attention, and listening to that little voice and letting it be your guide. That guide of curiosity is the thing that pulls you to do something that is completely outside of your comfort zone, something that you wouldn't have expected and you don't know where it's going, but you just feel like there's something over here for me. It's interesting to think about following this guide because it's one of those things that society often tells us, well, it's good to follow your passions, but you should still have an objective. You should still be able to articulate where it is that you're going. But all of these philosophers and what Kenneth Stanley discovered in the novelty search is, no, that's not true. In fact, the biggest breakthroughs come when people don't have an objective. They're just following their curiosity, or in other words, their daemon. Now, the daemon has an interesting corollary with it. And many of you maybe have heard about this, particularly if you're deep in your research and you've been a scientist or you've become an expert in your field. And that is this concept called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, the Dunning-Kruger effect describes several different things, not least of which is, why are people so overconfident in what they know? And I'm sure if you've ever been watching Facebook or seeing out things on social media where you see people that have watched one documentary or read one book on swine nutrition or the best way to raise pigs, you see that they are way overconfident in what they know. And so let's talk a little bit about why that is. So the Dunning-Kruger effect basically marks the concept of how confident are you in what you know versus how much time have you spent studying it. Now, our natural intuition is that as you study something more, it goes up linearly. So the more time you spend on something, the more confidence you have in it. But it turns out Dunning and Kruger, who were two social scientists, discovered this is not actually what happens. What happens when people begin to learn something new, and you maybe remember this from your studies when you were becoming first an academic or first entering the field, that when you first start to learn something, your confidence skyrockets. It goes all the way up to 90%. And you've probably seen this on social media. Those people that have watched that one documentary now think they know everything there is to know about the way we raise pigs or what the problems are facing the industry. But then anybody that has a little bit more knowledge knows that as you keep learning, you hit the point where your confidence, instead of continuing to go up the more time you spend on it, it starts to go down. And that going down lasts for a very, very long time. In fact, it lasts for so long that it developed a name called the trough of disillusionment. Now, you may have experienced this, or if you've been on a college campus, you've probably seen this. This is where, if you see a bunch of PhD students that are learning and studying, instead of holding their head up high because they're in the ivory tower and they've learning everything that there is to know, they instead look slumped over and kind of sad and down. Well, that's because they haven't hit the bottom of that trough of disillusionment. And so they still feel like the more that they learn, the less that they understand. Now, the good news is, and many of you may feel this way, eventually you hit the bottom of that trough and you start to go back up. And this is where real expertise lies, and you can start to go back up in your confidence. Now, how does this relate to following your curiosity or building the future? Well, that trough of disillusionment is not actually a bad thing. In fact, this is a form of suffering that you have to go through if you're ever going to discover something new. So your curiosity is going to take you to a point where you get excited and you start discovering new things, but you have to be prepared to walk through this trough of disillusionment where things don't make sense, where you don't know where you're going, and you don't know when it will all end. But your purpose is found when you embrace this difficult moment. These are the times when you find something that no one has ever discovered before. This trough of disillusionment is where people will be able to talk you out of trying something new or going to that conference that you don't really know what the objective is, but you feel called to do it, or talking to these people about this subject that you just can't quit bringing up because there's something important for you there. When you discover something difficult and you embrace it, you will eventually transcend that spot where it's difficult. Now, that's not to say on this novelty search that you're going on, where you're looking for something new, something that is interesting to your daemon, that every single discovery will be important. But it is in this point where the only time you will find things that are truly important, truly allow you to transcend your industry, are when they are difficult. This is what allows you to transcend. And all of the meaning comes from transcending this suffering. You know, this moment when you're tired, when you want to give up, when people are telling you that it's wrong or you're headed in the wrong direction, there will come a moment when suddenly all of this suffering makes sense. It suddenly becomes a part of something much, much larger than you ever anticipated. And this transcension is where you will have meaning. This is the type of thing that will happen when you make a big discovery, and this is what leads us to being able to have pigs on Mars and doing things that we might never have imagined or expected. And that's why it's so exciting that you are at this conference today. You are doing something interesting, something different, and you might have had a little bit of trouble justifying the time. What am I going to learn here? What am I going to discover? But it is, if you follow this curiosity, then you will discover things that are really deeply important to what you will discover and put out into the world. So if you're going to get the most from today, then I have to ask you, I have to implore you, think about all of those studies that Márcio was referencing before, the 90% that never get cited, never picked up, never used. Perhaps there's something deeply important in those. Perhaps there's something in what the speakers will say today that most of it doesn't apply to you. It doesn't have any kind of relevance, but something in there might pique your curiosity. It might get you to say, wait, I wasn't expecting you to say that. I didn't anticipate it. And it's in that moment that you should listen to your daemon and follow your curiosity, because that's what will allow you to do something new and completely different. You know, I was talking with Márcio about this whole project, and he told me, I want you to add a little bit of chaos, and I want you to do something that's a little bit dangerous, something that's difficult for you. And so that's actually exactly what I did, which is why instead of me giving an ordinary talk, I did it from this VR headset, and I tried to do something new and totally different that I'd never done before. So that's what brought me to you here today. And I actually discovered more than I ever imagined that I would, giving a swine talk as a communications professional that has nothing to do with swine nutrition or swine medicine. So I encourage you, when you're in this place, this is a special conference that is embracing the chaos. It's offering you an opportunity to see and do things that you might not ordinarily be as exposed to. But I would implore you, figure out something inside of there that captures your interest, that makes you curious, and follow it. Because that is the way that we will transcend the spot we're at today to do something new and completely different. So thank you for your time here today. This has been a great honor.
Hey, Vance, this has been great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And one question I have for you, what is some practical ways to explore or to expand the curiosity of someone?
Curiosity is one of those things that it's very difficult to nail down. What should you be curious about? It's really just those things that you hear and you don't really understand. And the people that are willing to go towards the things that they don't understand, the ones that are willing to ask questions, even though it makes them feel a little bit silly, those are the ones that make discoveries that maybe you never would have found before. So the biggest encouragement I have when you're having small talk with somebody, don't think of it as small talk. Think of it as a novelty search. You're listening for what the other person can say that you didn't expect them to say, and then follow that up. What is that thing that makes you go, wait, that was unexpected? And every single conversation you ever have, there is always something to be curious about. And that's what will lead you to new discoveries.
Very good.